you're here, and we're so glad that you are joining us. If you've come to Room with the Views before, we're glad to see you back. And please use the chat on the side for claps and emojis, and just just show us that you're here and listening and alive, as we like to do in virtual events. So welcome. Tonight we're going to be celebrating Teresa Carmody's novel, The Reconception of Marie. My name is Libby Flores, and I'm the Director of Audience Development and Digital Production at Bomb Magazine. And we're here to launch this beautiful book into the world. And before we do, I just have a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you don't know Bomb, we have been publishing conversations between artists since 1981. We also have a new podcast called Views that you can find on Apple Podcasts. And we boast an archive of interviews free and to the public online. A lot of people find it to be an amazing resource. If you subscribe to Bomb, you will receive new fiction, interviews, and art to your home 4 times a year. You can see I have our most recent issue behind me. And it also comes with an extra kind of surprise. We have inserts, and actually we have a protest poster inside of this issue. So we offer a lot of great stuff all through the year. So we welcome you to subscribe. You can see a link that will be dropped in to subscribe to Bomb. So tonight we are going to be featuring 2 authors, obviously a debut novel. You are going to want to buy these books. I know you are. So we're going to drop a bookshop link into the chat, and that is the way you can find the books and purchase them on our Room with a View bookshop page. Also, I'm sure everybody knows this already as we kind of live in Zooms, but we have the question and answer box that's just below me. So please make sure to, as things occur to you during the conversation, drop in a question for Teresa or for Sarah if you would like, and Sarah will get to those at the end of the night, and we will be able to hear from you that way. The order of things tonight, we're going to begin with a short reading by Teresa, followed by the conversation, and then, as I said, the Q&A. It's a real treat to have Sarah Gerard with us tonight. Just a fun fact, she used to work at Bomb, so it's all in the family tonight. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce both authors with their formal bios. Teresa Carmody's writing includes fiction, creative nonfiction, and inter-arts collaborations, including the novella Maison Femme, a fiction. Her work has appeared in the Collagist, LitHub, WHR, 2 Series Ladies, Diagram, St. Petersburg Review, and Faultline. Carmody is a founding co-editor of Les Figues Press, an imprint of the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the director of Stetson University MFA of the Americas. The Reconception of Marie is her debut novel. Sarah Gerard is the author of the novel Binary Star and a finalist, which was a finalist for the LA Times Art Seidenberg Award for First Fiction, and the essay collection Sunshine State, a New York Times Editor's Choice. Her short stories, essays, and interviews have appeared in the New York Times, Bomb Magazine, Bronte, McSweeney's, The Baffler, The Believer, and the anthologies, including We Can't Help It If We're from Florida. What a great anthology name. And Erase the Patriarchy and Tampa Bay Noir. Her novel True Love was released by Harper in July 2020. So right now we're going to let Teresa take it away with a reading. So let's all welcome her.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Libby and Josh and Sarah and Bomb for hosting this event. And thank you to Todd and Aurelia at Spuyten Duyvil for publishing the novel, which I have the a galley here. So I'm going to read just from the beginning of the book. And at the beginning, there's 2 epigraphs. So we're going to hear this. So the book has several voices, which we'll talk about, and you're going to hear the adult voice first and then Marie's 13-year-old voice. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Ephesians 6:12. Grace fills empty spaces, but it can only enter where there is a void to receive it, and it is grace itself which makes this void. Simone Weil. We prayed for angels to surround us in a hedge of protection, but never imagined the angels to look like this: rainbow-striped wings in soft light, gold, blue, red, and white. The wings are peacock-spotted, a dot on each feather, eye-bright, globe-like. Fra Angelico painted this Annunciation in the north corridor of the convent of San Marco, Florence, sometime between the years of 1438 and 1450. We had never heard of Fra Angelico. We knew about Italy, but didn't imagine it as a place we could visit, especially to look at a painting by some dead Catholic friar. We believe that art, like fancy schools and big cities, belong to other people, not us. We prayed for angelic protection because that was in the Bible, Psalm 91. We knew the Bible, or thought we did. It's our book. We're US Americans, God's chosen ones. 1987, Western Michigan. A real Christian. Today proves it. Jennifer Hartman and Angie have definitely lost their salvation. Real Christians don't act like them, which means they were born again for a grand total of 2 weeks and 2 days. Now it will be even worse for them because they know the truth and they've ignored it, 2 Peter 2:21. They were weird that night too, not after they were saved, but before. It started when Jennifer Hartman asked why my family isn't Catholic anymore, and Angie stopped laughing and looked at me as if she were super interested. I knew they had been talking about me behind my back. That's why I invited them over, but not Denise. Because while Denise is my absolute best friend, I don't have to be with her every day for her to still like me. But if you're not with Jennifer Hartman and Angie every day, they will turn against you, and they're always making fun of Denise. Jennifer Hartman especially loves to gossip. She's the biggest backstabber I know. When she dislikes someone, she'll let herself hate them. Last year, she wouldn't say one word to Beth McNorton's face, not a single yes or no. She wouldn't even look at Beth. She hated her that much. Angie thought this made Jennifer cool, but Angie is stupid that way. Jennifer Hartman sows discord and Angie dumbly reaps it. Jennifer Hartman's family wasn't even Catholic when they came to Sacred Heart. She didn't make her first communion with the rest of us, and she never talks about God or answers questions in religion class. So when she asked why we quit going to Catholic church, I knew it was a setup. "Are you serious?" I said. She nodded. I prayed silently, "The Lord is my strength and my shield," Psalm 28:7. And then I told her, I really told them. I said, "My mom quit going to Catholic church when she became born again. And while you may not know this about me, I'm born again too. Now that Dad is born again, we all go to Mom's church, even Dad, because there is more to God than what they teach at Sacred Heart. Do you know God gives us the whole story of history like one gigantic painting? If you look, you can see yourself in it and it within you. Our story begins with Adam and Eve and their fall and the promise of Jesus as the one true Messiah. He definitely lived, died, and rose again, and he will return someday, probably in the next 13 years, since that's the year 2000. When Jesus returns, the whole world, including made-up places like Michigan, will be destroyed and God will win. If you read the actual Bible, it doesn't say anything about Catholic priests or popes, and it especially doesn't include the saints. Saints are like pets Satan gives to Catholics to distract them from the real God. Saints even seem harmless, like kittens, puppies, or bunnies. Did you know that rabbits bite and kittens turn into cats that scratch? The Bible says we should pray to God and God alone. Therefore, when you pray to a saint, it's like talking to God's dog while ignoring the master. According to the Bible, no one will enter the kingdom of God unless he is born again. And while Father Burns says there are different kinds of sin, mortal and venial aren't as bad, the Bible says all sins are mortal sins, because the wages of sin is death, and death comes to everyone. I talked for an unusually long time, and Jennifer Hartman and Angie listened like they'd never heard the Bible before. I told them this was the most important news they'll ever hear. It's the truth of salvation, the reason they exist. Now that they know the truth, it will affect them forever. I stopped after the word forever. They were very quiet. Maybe this was the first time they realized they are going to die. I'll stop there.
Hi, Teresa.
Hello.
You're so funny. I don't even know where to begin. There are so many layers to this book, and it's so sharp and just but so heartfelt too. You have a way of you're so concise and so incisive in seeing, but you bring so much care to this subject too. I guess the most obvious question has to do with just the timeline of the book. It took you 20 years to write this, and obviously you've done so much else along the way. You've been running a press, you're running an MFA program right now. You've published other books along the way, and essays and short stories, and so. But you were doing this the whole time too.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. So, well, first I just want to say it's so great to be here in Florida with you. Sarah and I are beaming into everyone's space from different sides of Florida. So that's really great. And Florida is also in the book because she has a road trip, right, to Florida.
True. It's true. And we took a road trip. My partner, Patty, and I took a road trip to see you recently. Not too long ago too. Yeah.
Yes. So the timeline for the book. So this book, it was when I first started writing, this was the story, this was an essay that I was working on. And it became actually a version of this became my MFA thesis, in 2002, I guess. But what I realized, and I was studying creative nonfiction and poetry initially. And so there's a lot of autobiographical content in this book. But what I realized at the end of that experience of writing, during doing the MFA program, was that there were things that I wanted to be able to explore that fiction gives you the space to do. And that I also needed to think about how the book fit into a broader architecture of literature. And so I very deliberately put that draft away and decided to not write on it for 2 years. So this 20-year period, and this is just that those 2 years are just two of the many breaks I had from actually working on it. And so what I did is I read during those 2 years, and I wrote the short stories that are in this collection called Requiem, and I was learning about fiction and how do stories work. And then I copied all of the Psalms, one a day for 150 days. And at the end of that, I started writing the book again. And so for many years, I was working on this novel, and there's just so many twists and turns. I was actually thinking about the fact that I've been sitting with it for 20 years. And so, when we talk about autobiographical content, we're often talking about content, right? We're talking about experiences, but there's also the experience of being inside a book that you're writing for such a long time. And in some ways that feels like the real autobiographical content is that here's this space that I've been in and out of for so many years that I'm now sharing with all of you.
Mm-hmm. So how did it find its final form? Oh, maybe you could just describe the structure of the book.
Yeah. So the structure of the book is Marie when she's 13, when she's 17, and then when she's 8 years old. And that's, and then interwoven in between those are these, I call them essayistic bits that are Marie as an adult looking back and reflecting on her own, what some in like the ex-evangelical community call her own deconstruction, or like her own changed faith, right? And so where she came from, and also she's looking at these paintings by Fra Angelico and reading them very closely. So how did it come to that? Well, for many years it was just the novel with the 13, 17, and actually it was 9, and that I knew that I had wanted it to be I wanted it to go back in time, because I wanted to disrupt the linear narrative of progress, like a progress narrative of both the US and Christianity in that way. In several years, or I guess like 5 years ago, the night Trump was elected, I started working with a literary agent, Amanda Annis, who was great. And she suggested that I either amp up the plot and make it more distinctly YA, or that I go more experimental and make it what she called, literary spiritual. And so that's the route I went. She felt like one of the things with having a young adult narrator is that people think that it's then automatically YA. And so, and I was open to that, but really in the end, that's not what the book was. I wanted it might appeal to young adults, but it wasn't a YA book in terms of genre.
It's satirical. It's very sophisticated, actually. Her voice at 13 is actually, very sophisticated. It's very self-aware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so.
Which I think places it in an adult genre, I guess is
right.
what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I can see that it has a broad adult appeal.
Yeah, because I was also trying to write this voice in a way that was true to the voice, but also that the reader would see these kind of holes in the content, right?
Right.
But at the same time, in a way that wasn't poking fun. Sometimes there's books where it feels like the writer is kind of going into an agreement with the reader to make fun of a kind of character, and I didn't want that. I always wanted the spiritual content to be serious, and it is a spiritual book. Like in the end, it was also through a lot of spiritual, like divinatory practices that led not only to the Fra Angelico paintings. Like, thank you, Joan Dickinson, for that amazing, the amazing, what is that thing called? The astrological chart reading where the Annunciation first came up. So there's a lot of intuitive or other kinds of practices that I used to go into the content that appears in those interstices, essayistic bits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think that lends some weight and some seriousness to the passages about evangelicalism, and actually kind of places it alongside, and these other spiritual practices, and alongside other spiritual, or I guess within an overall spiritual quest that Marie has. I wonder, you said something about ex-Angelicalism earlier, and I don't know if everybody knows what that is, and if you can talk about some of the reading you've been doing.
Yeah, so I actually learned about this. I learned that term from my nephew, and there's a gentleman, Blake Chastain, who's did a podcast. He started doing this podcast shortly after the 2016 election, called Ex-Evangelical, and he was interested in the way that the white evangelical church came out in such support for Trump, and the way that this kind of Christian nationalism. And so he was interested in the podcast. I've listened to many of the episodes, but it was really talking to people who have come out of that movement, or that that belief system, and their sort of journey toward their own moral autonomy, right? And there's also a way where there's a lot about like one of the meditations in the book too that came much later was around this question of spiritual abuse, right? And so I think this is the thing that Marie as a character is grappling with, is that she's told that that being who she is, she can't be who she is. And this doesn't, you know, she's queer and she's female, but it doesn't, even if she wasn't that, like the mindset of that particular belief system is like, you have to be as the church says you should be, right? And so, and that's abusive, right? That's like, it's a trying to take over the internal landscape toward, you know, it's like trying to siphon that energy toward something else or toward their, so does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah. I'm thinking about, as a writer, how your spiritual practice is intertwined with your creative practice. How do you get, you know, language from this, your own personal history, I guess, of evangelicalism and divinatory practices, and how does this symbology, I guess, enter your work?
Well, when I first, so when I first started writing this book, a lot of what I found was that I was saying all of this stuff that I didn't even know was still held inside of me. And at one point, I even, at one point I was going through some materials from my childhood, and I had an experience where I had a memory of something very traumatic happening, and having this sentence come into my head that was very punishing and shaming, right? A kind of purity culture sentence. And I later, you know, was going through materials and saw that same sentence in materials from my childhood. And so, which was one of those, oh, look, the things that are coming up inside you are, you know, we're programmed. Language matters. What language comes in absolutely matters. And so so at the beginning, so if I say that because it was like, initially there was a lot of sort of I felt like I was skimming stuff off, right? Like I was getting all of this language out. And then and then eventually I led into doing a lot of spiritual healing practices. And so, as you know, I read tarot cards, and that is a way to engage with mystery, right? It's a way to think about narrative. It's a way to get in touch with intuition. It's a way to get in touch with another kind of knowing. And I feel like that's what happens in writing practice too. Like in any creative practice, it's those beautiful synchronicities that start happening. And the thing that you need, the next thing that you need for whatever it is you're making, if you're paying attention, it's there already, you know?
There's something too about writing that is setting chaos and order, and I see Marie doing that too in the book, in her use of lists and graphs and what do you call them, sentence diagrams. And I wonder if you can talk about that just on a formal level as you were writing, you know, or there's something
part of it is that those kinds of lists and diagrams, those are things that are often used in the middle school classroom, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you know, and I taught middle school actually for a while too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they're used in the middle school classroom as these tools for making sense of character, or, doing the compare and contrast list, what she does with Saint Rosa, right? Comparing Saint Rosa to her. Like that's a classic. Like let's look at two characters in a literary text. So it's a lot of those are actually things that were appropriate to the age, but it's also that she's trying to make sense of things. She's trying to figure out who she is. She's trying to, she's trying to discern, right? And so I think that the tools are, they're fine tools. Like they're not, but they can be tools of discernment. Like I love a good list still,
I use lists a lot in my writing, and I think especially too because these are in Marie's voice, and that the writing that you do in school, when you're making a list or doing some kind of free write in school, or in this case too in her diary, the writing is so informal and it feels so intimate, between the reader and Marie. And I'm wondering how you found, well, there's more than one voice in the book, and I guess I'm wondering, how do you find a voice as a writer? And especially in this case, it's two different first person voices, but it's the same person, but it's not the same person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or I guess rather three voices overall, but mostly two. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think so. With this particular book, another text that was really influential was Linda Barry's Cruddy. I love Linda Barry's work so much, and I don't know if you've ever read her novel Cruddy, but it's written in this. Roberta, the narrator, is this 13-year-old or 14-year-old girl, and that was actually one of the books when I was initially writing, like way back when I was writing this sort of in this reflective past tense, I voice as a memoir. And then I read Cruddy, and I actually got out my 13-year-old diary, and I was like, well, this voice is so alive, and it's also, and the voice, and I mean, the voice in Linda Barry is so alive, and it's so, it's so funny, and it's also, you could hear this horror just like in the background. And so that's where I began. I was like, well, why don't I just rewrite this as a 13-year-old and see what happens? And
I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and then it became interesting. It was like the 13-year-old section's the longest one of the adolescent voices, but that's also the way that adolescent, like 13 feels longer, right? Like there's a lot of formal choices I was making around how the kind of narrative in each of the sections moves. So 13 feels really long. It feels episodic. It feels like middle school. It's like, it's never going to end. Everything is excruciating, right?
Right. Yeah.
As opposed to 17, where we're sort of more in this kind of narrative and this, our own our cultivated narrative of, and it's this, she's caught in this romance. It's almost like a YA,
Yeah, and I'm thinking actually something that you do that's really effective, and I won't give away what happens to Marie, but something happens to her that year that is very traumatic, and it's a real turning point in the book, and it passes by almost like within just a page, but the silence around it echoes so loudly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's, so you're right, it's a shorter section, but it's obviously intentionally omitted, but I can't believe I haven't asked you this yet about gossip, because that's actually where this whole event began, was with, we wanted to have a formal conversation about gossip. You have a PhD in gossip.
Yeah, that's
literally. Can you talk about that? And also, even just in the opening pages of the book, it's so evident how important that concept is, I think, for Marie.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do. One of the things I studied with my PhD is gossip, and one of the books I found really useful is by this woman, Patricia Spacks. It's called, I think, Gossip, but she puts gossip on a continuum. That not all gossip is, gossip has this kind of bad rep. It's been feminized. It actually comes from God's sip. It comes from your godparents, right? Like, the etymology of the word traces back to the godparents that would be there attending the birth, right? But then it became more associated with women, and it became denigrated. But she puts gossip on a spectrum, so that there is gossip that's malicious and that is intended to hurt others, and that is often about power struggles, even if the people who are gossiping don't know or aren't aware of their, the envy perhaps that's motivating their gossip. But then there's gossip that is about actually building intimacy between people. So a great example that I have to credit my colleague Terry Whittick for is talking, it's like the difference between saying, like, Sarah, did you see those shoes that Mary was wearing? Like, what's up with that, right? As opposed to, Sarah, Mary always looks so great. It makes me feel insecure about my fashion. How do my shoes look? So we might be talking about somebody else, but it's actually toward, toward building intimacy and building trust and sort of working things out. And I think that in the book, both of those kinds of gossip are there. Marie is very, certainly the girls are gossiping about each other, and she's gossiping about them, but she's trying to not gossip, right? So and she can't, there's a section called Not Gossip, and she's like,
it's like, if I just tell the whole truth about each of these people, then it's not gossip.
Yeah, but it is like she's
honest.
No, exactly. It is like she's on RuPaul's Drag Race, and like the library is in, and she's just like, I'm going to tell you everything about them. But at the same time, on the other side of it, it's a novel, and this is this deep, intimate, connection, hopefully, that Marie is making with Marie and the writer is making with the reader, right? She's also disclosing this thing.
Right.
And she is trying to work things out. She is trying to figure out who she is. She's trying to figure out
who her friends are.
Her friends are. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I really felt tenderness towards the character of Denise. And I wonder if you can just talk about her in the book. I don't know how else to put it, except she's that friend,
Yeah.
Everyone has one. So,
yeah. So she is Marie's actual true friend, right?
Yeah.
But Marie often can't, I feel like she takes Denise for granted often.
That's not how I saw it, but
I think,
go on.
I think she does more than, I'm thinking about that opening thing where it's like, she's not inviting Denise,
but she's like she's undercover in a way at that party too, because she knows these other friends have been gossiping about her, right? Yeah. So
yeah, that's absolutely. But she also, in that way that happens in middle school, high school, and in adult life, like who you align with, these kinds of power struggles and cliquishness doesn't, people make judgments based on who you're intimate with. Right.
Yeah.
Which is the malicious gossip. Like, I'm not saying I agree with that or think it's like, it's just, but it is something that humans do. Right. But Denise is, Denise is, she is, as I said, a true friend, but it's also, she helps Marie see so many things, even though Marie can't see them necessarily at the time. And I think about, like, in queer communities, how we often, our families are chosen, and friends are so important, in terms of our chosen kin, right? And I think that Denise shows Marie, she is this kind of first love in that way.
I had wondered that too. There's and Veronica too. I felt
Mm-hmm.
this sort of pre-sexual queer closeness. You know, the thing that you can't put your finger on just yet, but
Yeah,
can only recognize
absolutely.
in retrospect.
Yeah, that makes me think about a line. I think it's a line in one of your stories about like, do I like her or do I want to be her?
Do I want to be her or do I want to fuck her?
Yeah. Do I want?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Both and perhaps neither, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And, you know, and this, I think you're something that's really special about your book too, is that um, it's looking at, well, I guess I'm wondering, can you talk about uh, your particular brand of divination, which uses you're very interested in the saints too, and in Catholic symbology and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I also, I guess, well, go ahead. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
please talk about that.
So I'll say in the book, one of the things, so in the book, Marie becomes interested in reading these saints' autobiographies, but the saints are considered bad, right? They're considered because because it would be akin to praying to idols, right? So there's this way, um, at least in her immediate family, obviously not in the Catholic school. And so there's this way where the saints become this kind of forbidden or both forbidden and eroticized zone in her psyche, and this kind of secret reading. And then in my own practice, I just have been, there's so I studied divination with Sela Satterstrom, and there's a history of or there's a syncretic analogies between saints and other kinds of energetic forces, right? And so, but I find the saints to be these helpful entities to call upon. I mean, Saint Clare, for example, who is the patron saint of television. She's the patron saint of clairvoyancy, right? And she's been very active during the pandemic. But that she's the patron saint of psychics, of second sight, right? Which is Sarah, that time that when you came to, the article that you wrote on Casadega, the spiritualist community, right? And you and I went and took a workshop there together on clairvoyancy.
On clairvoyance.
Yeah. And the teacher, Joy, was saying it's been a line that I've quoted many times, which is, the clairs have to work together. The clairs have to work together. And he was talking about, clairaudiency or clairvoyancy, but clairsentience, right? But I like to think about the clairs as also being, sort of a community of people too.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you consider your writing to be a form of divination.
Yes. I mean, I think that I would bring in the word prophecy more, as Marie would, and I would bring that word in the sense. I mean, I think that Kathy Ecker's work is prophetic too, but in the sense that there's a writer that I've been reading, Kevin Garcia. He has this great description he says the prophetic is actually just seeing something clearly. When you see something clearly, then you sort of begin to see how things will go, right? We get so caught up in the narratives that we want to be happening, or in the narrative, or in our resentments, or in our, the way that our perception creates our reality. And so if you can actually come into more awareness about your own emotional sense then I think you can actually see more clearly. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in my writing in general. And so in that sense, I would say that it's a lot. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, I just keep thinking of Marie because, and her line about being honest with herself, you know, and I think it's actually in the report that she's writing about, well, you can Mary Magdalene, basically. And I think she's asking herself at that point in the book too, whether she's queer. And, you know, and there's a kind of parallel and what she's saying about Mary Magdalene, but being both the whore and the virgin, you know.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, there's so much that she can't see when she's young because it's so incredibly terrorizing and scary to see that. Right. So around her sexuality, even around her intellect in many ways, like she can't actually acknowledge that because there isn't a space in the world that she lives in, or that in the world that she inhabits, for that kind of, you know, young female to exist. And
right, she keeps saying, you know, I don't want to be a wife, or, you know, I don't want to be a mother, and she, you know, and watches her sister become just that at such a young age,
right,
to be kind of forced into that at a young age too.
Exactly. But she doesn't know what else to do besides that, right?
Right.
That's sort of the model that she's given. And so I lost my train of thought right there. But
well, it's such a beautiful moment then when I think it's Marie's cousin says, you better go to college. Yeah. It's actually funny. I was thinking about the shape that the book makes, and one of the voices starting almost where it ends, you know, or ending kind of right where it begins, and making kind of this infinity shape.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of right there in that moment, actually. I think, you know, when she decides to go to college, that's kind of where she's set free, you know. Her mind is, or
at least she's pointed in that direction, because I think that, and that's she's pointed in that direction, but then it's actually this long, slow process that is written through those interludes, or as I like to call them, essayistic bits. Yeah.
Let me see if there's any questions here. Okay, Ben Samuel would like to know what art from any discipline influenced your work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this particular book, again, because I was working on it for over so many years, there's so many different things that influence this particular work. I was thinking about, you know, I mentioned Linda Berry, who's been a big factor. I've mentioned Sela Satterstrom in terms of literature. But a visual artist who I think that this particular work is in conversation with is actually Frida Kahlo. And in the sense of this, you know, I love so that she does these kinds of non-mimetic self-portraits, right? That are about getting to an emotional truth, they're not about documenting exactly an experience. You know, it's not representational of a moment, a clear moment in time, but the portraits and the way that she's using her body to you know, to portray something, the way that she's being unflinchingly honest in her perception. Like, she's not trying to make herself look better or worse. She's just trying to be as honest as she can. And there's that work, What the Water Gave Me, Lo que el agua Medeo, where it's her feet in the bathtub, and then there's all of these different aspects in the water from her life. And I feel like this book in particular is sort of in conversation, or I see a kind of parallel between that, these different instances, and yet there is the body. You know, there are the feet. She's there in a bath, which again, for those who you know, there's a practice of spiritual baths. I took many spiritual baths while writing this book, actually, as a way to divine content. So, yeah.
I have another question here. How did you know that Marie was finally finished? Was it just being comfortable with the spaces? I think you said interstices between the essayistic bits and the original narrative voices.
Yeah, that's a great question, Brandy. Hi, Brandy. You know, the book took a really long time to find its home, and so I mentioned earlier that I had the novel part kind of done, or as done as I could get it, and then I started working with this literary agent for a while, and that brought in this other form. And then, but we still couldn't sell the book. And then when Spuyten Duyvil picked it up, by the time that they picked it up, I was actually planning a funeral for it, because I just needed to like energetically release it. And I was like, and I also, by that point, had, you know, it's like my marriage had ended. I was, you know, I like got married and divorced, you know, separated, and raised children in the course of writing this book, right? Like whole lives lived over the course of writing this book. And I just was at this point of like, I had to release it. But I also was working with this therapist here in Florida who works specifically with spiritual abuse. And so when it was accepted for publication, or even right before it was accepted for publication, I knew that I wanted to go back in, that there was a thread with the demonic that I hadn't seen all the way through. And that it was a thread that I hadn't been able to see through in myself yet. And so, when it was accepted, that focused my attention in another way. And then I did it was like a 5-month revision. And, you know, and further honed it, and then saw that last bit all the way through. And then I knew it was done after that. You know, I mean, it needed, like, the press was waiting for it, but it felt like I had finally tackled this last really scary piece, which had to do with the demonic, you know.
I wonder if you can talk about the last pages of the book, too, the youngest voice in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I said before, I always knew that it would end on her youngest voice, and I didn't know why formally for a long time. It was kind of an intuitive knowing, and but when we come to that point, in many ways, so I'm really bad because I don't believe in spoilers. So I know, but in many ways, but when we come to that voice, it's around Marie being able to sort of hold her younger self with care, you know. So there's a way through therapy and other things that we have to learn how to mother ourselves, and not because our mothers aren't, you know, good mothers, but because that's actually what it means to become a responsible person, you know, who's sort of taking emotional responsibility for yourself. You have to learn how to you have to do as my therapist calls it, the parts work. Like, you learn who your parts are, and then you like hold them close, and not in a defensive way, but like in a nurturing way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I come to the end of the book, that's a big part of what I feel like is happening. I actually rewrote that whole last section. it was almost all completely new than what it had been for many, many years.
Interesting. I won't ask you how because no spoilers, but that's
Yeah.
really interesting because it's so, the writing is so spare, it's so compressed in that section. So it's really interesting to hear. We have some more questions. Nick Monfort, besides competing for your time, how did your work as editor and publisher interact with you as you wrote this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Hi, Nick. So my work as an editor and publisher, I think that editing and publishing is such a great way to read. It's such a great way to learn about literature and to learn about, eh, and to learn too about how do you design something in a way that it reflects the content. So that was something that was always really important for us at Les Figues, that the actual interior book design, which I did a lot of that myself or would work with people who were doing it very closely. How do you actually have that interior design amplify the content in some way? And, there's a way where I think the architecture of this book, you can see this kind of studied, that this study over the course of many years of thinking about other people's work in that way. Architecture is one of the things I'm fascinated with in my work in general, and the architecture of work and architecture in work and architecture as a metaphor for making and for being and spaces that you go into and out of. So.
Patrick Greeny is asking, how did writing Marie transform you as a writer? What's different about your writing post Marie?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Hi, Patrick. So it's a hard question to answer, in part because of how long I sat with the project. But I think that, and so I don't, and also there is no post Marie. Let me just say this. So Marie actually is a character across several of my works. Marie is in Maison Femme, a fiction. That character is Marie. And I have a collection of short stories that I've been shopping around, and that character is also Marie. And the thing I'm writing right now, I'm actually returning to a first person voice. And so the character hasn't been named, but I have a strong suspicion that this is Marie as well. And so part of what I'm interested in sort of across these different works is the way that, each of these works takes a radically different form. And I'm interested in the way that is also an experience of being in the body. The body shifts, and yet that it's still you inside, the one who's witnessing, right? The body shifts, our circumstances shift. We could have radically different lives within, but yet here we are in this corpus, and we're also noticing the shift. Is the person, and so that I think is part of this larger project that I'm interested in, is this auto bio, like long picture of why does something have to keep taking the same form? Why can't we explore different forms, within the same character? Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody to buy a copy of The Reconception of Marie tonight via the bookshop link.
And by True Love, Sarah's amazing book.
Yes. And there's time for one more question, which is this, I'm pulling it from a longer question, but given that you took so much time with this book, did your intentions or questions or impulses change? Were there any early ideas that you had abandoned?
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, yes, formally, right? Like in terms of genre, I mean, I transformed it into fiction. It is fiction. There's things that happen in the book that are not my experiences, right? Um, but I think that the thing that actually stayed the same, and partly why I stuck with it for so long too, is that there was there was something about this experience of growing up in this particular community. Um,
And maybe you
yeah,
can tell everybody you describe that community
that
too.
community. Yeah,
Western
absolutely.
Michigan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in Western Michigan. So it's this very, it's very religious, sort of Bible Belt. And then, like Marie, I was both going to evangelical church with my mom, but also my extended family was Catholic, and so so I was in Catholic school and going to a non-denominational non-denominational affiliated with the charismatic movement church. But then also all of the social activities were church related. So I was a Calvinette, a missionette, went to church camp, you know, Bible club, Awana, you know,
I
it
love
was,
that scene at Awana. It's so
oh yes,
funny.
Awana.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was something about, how do you like I, in many ways, I loved going to all these different churches and hearing these stories, but they also were in conflict with each other. And so there's this question of like, how do you make sense when you have adults who are in authority telling you different, you know, telling you that the priest is wrong, you know, don't pray to Mary, that's a sin. Yet the priest, you know, is actually, you know, is saying, no, the Protestants are wrong. And, you know, and so the kind of, religious warfare
Mm-hmm.
between, I think that was that, that nugget, or that question really animated the work from the beginning, how to make sense of that. Like Marie's very interested in that, as I have been too.
And you know, yeah, I mean, and Marie is like in relentless pursuit of the truth, right?
Yes.
Which is ever elusive.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 And it's been, you know, it's a funny book too, because it's been, you know, in addition to having the sort of young adult voice, it's also, she's saying these things that are really upsetting. I mean, it begins with her converting her friends, and, you know, people are not mission fields, as Chrissy Stroop, you know, says, like, you know, that's a very violative thing to do, actually. And so it's also trying to make sense of, how do you make sense of something that was both meaningful, but also to start recognizing the harm that it did. And
Right.
also to have, you know, coming from a family who I love, and who many of them are very still religious, right? And they're not meaning harm, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and yet there can be harm done, you know, I mean, so
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So whereas some of your initial questions may have transformed over the course of the book, this one,
yeah.
yeah, at the core has remained at the core of it,
Hmm.
obviously. And I feel like as a writer, we need something like that to pull us all the way through a work, right? A question that can't really fully be answered.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And and it's not answered, you know, it's like, and the work becomes in many ways as good as the question. And so it's like, choose your questions well,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
or like, you know, really press into those questions.
Right. Take your question seriously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more, Libby? Or okay. Monica De La Torre is asking, hi Monica, echoing Nick's question, besides competing for your time, how does teaching inform your writing?
That's a good question. I mean, often I will be bringing in texts or ideas that I'm thinking about, um, to the classroom. I might design a class around something that I'm trying to figure out. Um, so that absolutely, you know, ends up having an impact in a kind of slant way, right? But I'm thinking, like, at one point I was really trying to figure out the unreliability of Marie's voice, for example. And this was actually years ago, and I was teaching at UC San Diego. And so I actually designed a whole class called The Unreliables. And we just explored unreliable narrators, and they wrote unreliable narrators, you know. I mean, that's one of the really great things about teaching, is that you can think through something with a group of people, and that is informing your work as much as it is informing them. And, you know, isn't that kind of how writing and art is made anyway? It's always this collective effort and collective conversation.
Mm. And Hunter is asking about your writing process on a day-to-day basis. How do you find time? You sound like a very busy person, he says. How do you find time?
Hi, Hunter. Yes, I am. Yeah, so I block out time, basically. But also, you know, I live here now in Central Florida, where there's not a lot to do except for contemplate the, as I call it, the deep green silence. So yeah, I mean, that disciplined will, right? And so setting and deciding it different, you know, setting the timer for an hour and a half, and just be like, I'm going to just write for an hour and a half. This has been my new strategy. I'm going to just write for an hour and a half. And when a question comes up that I want to get on the internet and Google, right, which I know will like eat into my time, I'm writing it on a little notepad instead and
That's
just keep writing.
Idea.
Yeah, it totally works. And then you have this weird list afterwards.
And imagine writing with a pen, you know. I feel like so many
Yeah.
of us just take to our phones now, or take to
Take to
our
computer.
laptops. But
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and also writing on different size sheets of paper. I love doing that too, like getting really big paper. And yeah.
I do a lot of writing in transit too, in between places, like while I'm, you know, well, in New York would be when I was on the train or something. But yeah. But now it's like in the car. I'm often like dictating into the phone or something, talking to myself. Yeah.
That's great.
Hi, Libby.
I'm back. Thank you both. This is such an extraordinary conversation. And Teresa, not to brag, but I've never had such a fan club going on in the chat. Like, you really have some lovers of your teaching and of your person, and of course of your work, and that must feel really good. Beautiful reading and beautiful conversation, and I just love this sentence keeps coming to me as I'm listening to you, that almost like divining the self. Like, I just feel like that's at the root of this book and this conversation, and we're honored to launch it tonight. So this has been so lovely. We've dropped the bookshop link several times, like hint, hint, and everybody knows what to do. We'll also email you probably Thursday with a book link too. And thank you for being with us tonight, really, and sharing your evening with us. So thank you.
Congratulations, yes. Teresa.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Libby.
Yeah.
Thanks,
thank you,
Josh.
everyone,
Thanks,
for
Bomb.
being here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love Bomb. So
Yay.
it's like really, yeah, I do. It's like really an honor. So.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Well,
everybody loves Bomb.
We can do this anytime now, Teresa. The door's been open.
Great. No, I do. I really love Bomb. So everybody should subscribe to Bomb too. Yes.
Yeah, that link will be coming too. Well, have a wonderful night. This is always the awkward end to the Zoom. So some people like to hum us out or sing us out. You know, maybe we can just clap ourselves out. But thank you again, and much success with the book.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.